Why does replying to a work message at 9 p.m. bother you more than it should? Not because it's long, not because you hate your job, but because it erases the ending. Work today doesn't have a closing door. There's no transition ritual, no clear moment that tells your brain, today is done. There are only notifications, and every notification reopens a cognitive loop. Research on attention residue shows that when you switch tasks, part of your brain remains attached to the previous one. You don't fully reset, you carry unfinished fragments into your private space. If that happens once, it's manageable. If it happens 10 times every evening, your nervous system begins to maintain a low level state of vigilance. Not intense stress, just enough to prevent real rest. This is where Gen Z reacts more strongly than previous generations. They grew up in a constant notification environment. Their brains are accustomed to fast, variable, unpredictable feedback. Uncertainty activates the dopamine system more powerfully than certainty. So, a small message isn't just information, it's a signal that the loop isn't closed. When the loop doesn't close, the brain doesn't switch into recovery mode. And recovery isn't a luxury, it's a requirement for sustainable performance. But this isn't only about neuroscience, it's about control. Self determination theory shows that autonomy is a foundational human drive. When your sense of control over your time is disrupted, stress rises, even if your workload stays the same. If you grew up in an environment where everything was measurable, online grades, performance metrics, engagement numbers, you develop a heightened sensitivity to invisible monitoring. When work spills into personal time, the brain interprets it as a loss of control. That's why arguments about Gen Z being lazy miss the point. They're not reacting to volume, they're reacting to the absence of a natural stopping point. And there's another layer. Many Gen Z adults witnessed burnout up close. They saw prolonged sacrifice. They saw exhaustion normalized. And they saw that sacrifice didn't always guarantee long term security. According to social learning theory, people learn from observed consequences. If you repeatedly observe depletion, you internalize the pattern. So, setting boundaries isn't a rejection of ambition, it's a risk reduction strategy. There's an internal conflict here. You want to move forward, you want recognition, but you also want to preserve a part of your life that isn't absorbed by your professional role. When the system demands constant availability, that conflict becomes visible. And here's the part few people say out loud. Gen Z entered adulthood amid economic instability, a global pandemic, and rapid technological shifts. When the future feels uncertain, preserving personal resources becomes more rational than maximizing intensity. Conservation of resources. Theory explains this clearly. Humans work to protect time, energy, and emotional stability as finite resources. When those resources feel eroded, people build barriers. Boundaries are a form of barrier, not to withdraw, but to prevent continuous erosion. And this leads to a more important question. If work can enter every space, phone, email, chat, who decides the stopping point? The organization or you? Because once you stop actively creating a stopping point, the system won't create one for you. And when the stopping point disappears, the first thing that erodes isn't performance. It's the feeling that you exist outside of performance. If that thought makes you pause even slightly, then this debate was never just about work hours. It's about how much control you want to keep over defining yourself in a world that constantly measures you. The hardest part of this story isn't the work hours, it's the feeling of being replaceable. Generation Z grew up in an economy where job security is no longer the default. They witnessed mass layoffs. They saw companies talk about being a family and then downsize through email. They saw entire industries disappear within a few years. When you come of age in an environment like that, work no longer feels like absolute safety. It feels like a temporary contract. That creates a baseline anxiety, not panic, but an awareness that your position could be replaced faster than you expect. And when that sense of replaceability exists, the brain starts looking for control somewhere else. Boundaries become one of those places. Not because you're unserious about work, but because if the system can withdraw its commitment at any moment, you'll hesitate to hand over your entire identity to it. This is a major shift from previous generations. Institutional trust used to be a stabilizing foundation, but research in recent years shows declining levels of trust in corporations and large systems, especially among younger adults. When trust in the system decreases, people increase investment in themselves. That helps explain why Gen Z talks so much about personal branding, portfolio careers, and multiple income streams. They don't just hold a job, they build adaptability. And when you invest in yourself rather than in a single organization, you protect your personal space more deliberately. There's another psychological factor that rarely gets discussed: algorithmic comparison. This generation doesn't just compare themselves to coworkers in the office. They compare themselves to thousands of peers globally. LinkedIn announces promotions, Instagram showcases startup success, TikTok highlights six-figure incomes at age 23. Constant comparison amplifies the feeling of falling behind, even when you're objectively doing well. When comparison pressure is high, protecting a part of your life that isn't measured becomes essential. If everything can be optimized and publicly displayed, you'll want at least one space that isn't a competition. That's why boundaries aren't only about energy, they're about the right not to be evaluated 24/7. I once spoke with a friend who works in tech. He works hard, very hard, but he always says one thing: I don't want my job to be the only thing that defines me. When his company restructured, he didn't panic like some others did. Not because he didn't care, but because he had never handed over his entire identity to the role. Distance creates flexibility, and flexibility is an asset in unstable environments. Ask yourself a harder question. If your company disappeared tomorrow, what in you would remain intact? Your skills, your relationships, your values, or just your title? If that question makes you slightly uneasy, you understand why Gen Z resists blurred boundaries. They're not resisting effort. They're resisting placing their entire existence inside a structure that offers no long-term guarantees. This isn't weakness. It's strategy in a high volatility environment. You're not broken for needing distance. You're adapting to a system that is no longer as stable as it once was. If you've ever felt torn between giving your all and holding something back for yourself, you're not alone. Share your experience in the comments. What boundary has been hardest for you to set? If you found this helpful, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss upcoming videos.